MAZEBREAKER spoiler season is upon us, and that means profiles. Corvus Belli's new Operation MAZEBREAKER action pack includes updates for both the jurisdictional command of Corregidor and the Aleph operations subsection, bringing both entirely new profiles and updates to existing profiles. While we don't have a full picture yet of everything about how the sectorials are changing, we do have a lot of information to go over, and so in this video, that's what we'll be doing. So what we'll be talking about today are Operation MAZEBREAKER first impressions. We'll be covering sectorial and fire team charts, all of the unit profiles for units in the upcoming pack, and basically talking generally about everything that has been released for public consumption, with the caveat that there are still a number of unknowns. Just for myself, taking a little bit of a lesson learned from Next Wave, we will try and keep an eye on possible unknowns, things that we aren't aware of at this stage. And I say we in the plural there because big thanks to Ollie for joining me for this video. Ollie, why don't you just jump in and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ollie. My ITS name is Blessed Be. Yeah, I've been playing Infinity for a long time, and recently I've been running IGL, so that's the Infinity Global League. So we do some online events, and I also have the great privilege and stress. It's a double-edged sword of playtesting. So I am in quite a nice position, quite privileged position to have actually put some of these things on the table, and I'm really excited to talk about sort of some vague first impressions. Obviously, I can't give everything away today, and to go through the profiles with you.
And I am really grateful for your time today because obviously the creators have had a little bit of an advanced look at some of these things. We've got an embargo. This video will be released on the embargo date, but I haven't had a chance to play with any of them. And in fact, I started a new job about 3 weeks ago, and I have been full out just taking care of that, which has left relatively little time to sit down and really digest through these things. And so what this video is going to be is back and forth. I'll mostly be giving very hot take first impressions. I'll try and make them measured, but they will be very much just, I am reading this not for the first time, but pretty close. Whereas Ollie has had a little bit of a chance to actually play with some of this stuff. Now, Ollie, please do set boundaries around anything that you think you can't talk about. Obviously, your position in the playtest is covered by its own separate NDA, and we don't want to push up against the boundaries of that. But again,
Yeah,
just big thanks for giving your time today. It's an enormous assist to me, and I'm actually really, really looking forward to this.
yeah,
So
I think it'll be good.
with that, let's start jumping on in, and we'll be talking about operations subsection first. Now, I've got the slide up on screen now. One of the things that we'll do here is we'll just call out some of the things that are unknown. Ollie, you may know about these, but for the purposes of our audience and certainly for myself,
Yeah,
no idea. And so
yeah.
for the purposes of this video, things that we don't yet know about and which are likely to have an impact on operations subsection as it kind of gets reworked are Yaksha tacbots, Johnny Cow, Dr. Claire Lazari, Kyra Sharma, and Pilot X Team. Now, I could probably make a guess that Pilot X Team, for example, might be a tagcom unit, but all of the rest of them, no idea. And so when we go next into the next slide to take a look at things like fire teams, we're just going to have to be aware that the way that these unreleased profiles, unspoiled profiles work could significantly change the faction, and also, the faction might be getting a little bit of rework or adjustment. Certainly when Next Wave came along, they didn't have complete access to everything that was in all of the profiles that they had access to. A big thing for me was that I made some predictions about Next Wave that I thought they'd be a quite good hacking faction. And they're by no means bad, but my assumption was predicated on the fact that they had Bit and Kiss and all of the Bit and Kiss profiles, which they didn't. So just some care and caution as we move through, but there's still plenty to chew on here. And that leads us pretty
Yeah.
naturally into the fire teams. And Ollie, do you want to jump in here a little bit and talk through? I've noted in red where there are troops in fire teams, and we don't know we don't know the profiles for those troops. But do you want to just jump in and start talking us through how these fire teams are looking?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to say to the listeners is just to avoid confusion. Dakinis, we haven't we haven't seen Dakinis, but we've seen a unit called the Dikpala that looks a lot like Dakinis.
Mm.
And so I'm just saying that because that's the first thing on the fire team chart here. I think the fire teams in OSS have become quite flexible with the addition of the Dikpala keyword, which means that you can make some quite nice duos and harrises with them. You've circled in red what look to be some characters, so some named characters with Claire Lazari, Johnny Cow, and things like that. So one of my first impressions, and I'm not going to give anything away, is that it almost appears as though OSS is undergoing a bit of a steel phalanxification, if that's a verb.
Hmm.
It's in that we're looking at some character additions, which obviously you guys don't know about yet, but I think that's quite interesting and can change how the faction plays. What are your first thoughts on that?
That's actually very interesting because, like, the Max Operations Fire team, for example,
Yep.
having Max and Claire, again, this is me being speculative, and you can sort of sit quietly and steeple your fingers.
Mhm.
Johnny Cow and Claire Lazari. Johnny Cow certainly sounds like a name that you might associate with an action hero. And so, if he's, for example, part of a crew that runs with Maximus or something, that will be a very interesting fire team. Maximus Optimate is Tag Max, isn't it?
I actually can never remember which name is which. I have to be honest with you.
We can
Um,
check that one. We can check that one in real time, but I'm pretty sure there's Maximus Optimus and then Maximus Agent, I want to say. And so
yeah.
if that's Maximus Optimate, it is, yes. So Maximum Optimus Optimate is the
Yep.
tag max. So there's going to at least be duo bonus options for Max. Now, it'll really depend
Yes.
on how good those characters are and if they're cheap or expensive or some benefit. But he's a weird one because he's a profile that I feel like I am consistently telling people not to take him unless they have a specific plan. And then he shows up in lists that win events where it's very
Yep.
clear that the person who won the event had a really specific plan. Because he's got these
Yeah.
like big strengths and big weaknesses. Like the man is packing a thunderbolt with a lot of buffs, but it's a thunderbolt. But then he's got all of these other things: immunity, possession, like surprising durability, etc. So being
Mhm.
able to slap a duo bonus on him, however that might be obtained, is interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it is interesting, and I think I actually really like Maximus the tag, sort of in fight teams because he does have, as you said, quite defined strengths and weaknesses.
mhm.
So I think being able to cart him along with another troop, it could be, for example, maybe an engineer, which would be really helpful, perhaps a hacker. That's something that's going to increase his potency.
I guess otherwise to look at this, the big fire team. So that's your tag fire team. That's sort of left out because we put these
Yeah,
new characters in it. But
yeah,
the probably the most significant change is the Dikpala fire team and all of the additions of
yeah.
keywords. And I am checking this in real time, but I suspect that the duo there is no. Okay, so operations fire teams could always be duos. That's something to always be checking. There's a bunch
Mhm.
of keywords there that weren't there before. So Dikpalas are just Dakinis, and
Yeah.
Davers right now count as Dakinis, but kind of nothing else does. And so now we've got Sharavas, Artalas, both being able to
Yes.
count as Dikpala. Now, an Artalas unit being able to count as a Dakini tacbot is like, is that incredible? Well, maybe if the Artalas profile changes just a little bit, but there's always something to be gained from that extra
Mhm.
flexibility. And keywording tends to unlock viable duos when you can
Yes.
staple like a Dikpala to any one other thing to get a gun and a utility piece. It's just there's interesting effect there. And the Assura's fire team, I'm going to just check in real time as well. It's stayed pretty similar. So the Asuras can get Asuras bonuses from Yadu and Shakti. Historically, that's difficult to justify points wise. So again, we might be looking out for the effective profile changes on them. The
Mhm.
only other thing I think I would note, the Samarthan fire team is obviously massively expanded. There are a ton more things that can go into a Samarthan fire team now. Presently, it's Riksha, Dawan, and Artalas. So
Yeah.
we've got access to the Sharava, we've got access to the character Kyra Sharma, in addition to a bunch of other things. I'll also note Maximus has he picked up the Shamarthan tag? He has, so that's new.
Yeah.
There's also an Optimate tag here, and I don't see Optimate fire teams. It's possible that's meant to be something else. That could just be a little legacy typo. We do see those in these very early drafts occasionally.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
I think there's increased flexibility almost across the board with the fire team tags. And there's some stuff that I really want to talk about, but I can't talk about at the moment. But yeah, there's a lot of added flexibility to the sectorial as a whole.
The big thing I think we're going to call back when as we jump in through troops, which we'll start doing very soon. Probably the most important thing I think is to call out. I believe it's the Sharvara. The Sharvara can appear in both Samarthan and operations teams, and it's pure in both. And that I believe is the little robot dog that they've picked up,
It is.
and
It
that
is.
tends to, from the look of it, that's the thing that might be able to join teams and offer some utility very easily. So keeping in mind when we get to that, that it's got these very flexible fire team tags, that's really interesting in terms of OSS's flexibility. The core of the identity really does seem very much intact here, but a lot will be unknown in terms of these red circled things. We'll probably
Yes.
still be talking about, Dikpala fire teams in particular, I would expect, in the absence of any other information, any other info, to stay the core, but there's a lot that could change based on the units because the keywords now enable it. And that's
Yes.
probably enough on the fire team. So what we'll do is we'll jump on through, actually just into our first profile. Your time is limited. We've got about 2 hours set aside for this, so we'll really try and barrel on through. And starting very much with a splash, with the
Yeah,
Assurus,
absolutely.
the Assurus elite troop, who I think it's probably fair to say, in absolute terms, is the strongest individual hacker in the game now.
Probably. I think so.
I,
Yeah.
I,
I
I
would
did a
say.
little bit. I've done a little bit of math on her, and you can, like, she's not invulnerable. You can bring her down with really dedicated first turn attacks, but you have to have something of comparable quality, an entire turn set aside for it. And
Mm.
to actually talk about that, just to run through the profile before I'll bounce to you for some impressions.
Mm.
Assura's profile is broadly unchanged across the stats. Still 6-2 move, still CC 20, Ballistic Skill 14, Fizz 12, Willpower 15, Armor and BTS 5 with 2 wounds, 2 Vita, and no wound incapacitation, so very durable. She retains her Multispectral Visor level 3, but
Mhm.
otherwise we start to see some changes. So, in addition to being a Ballistic Skill 14, high armor, high BTS, high wound count MSV3 trooper, she's gained ECM Hacker -3. That is always good on a HI, but it is incredible on a hacker. And then her profiles now, her Spitfire profile is now an AP Spitfire. That's just really good.
Yeah.
Armor piercing is something that I have seen players just in the last month talk about OSS and be like, I wish the Assura had armor piercing rounds. And then we get to the hacker. Now, small change, gone from a multi-rifle to a multi-marksman rifle. Large change, her hacking loadout has adjusted. So she's gained ECM Hacker, obviously, and then rather than having, now she previously had, I'd have to load it up and get checked, but from memory, she had a damage boosted Trinity, which was really good. Now she has
That's correct.
Trinity
Yeah.
+1 special die. And +1 special die, we've seen that appear on one other profile, on a Trinity profile, in the form of Gabriel DeFerson in military orders, and he has landed with a splash. And the Assura is stronger, tougher, more dangerous, brings her own ECM. Now, very, very expensive, but that's
Mm.
why I'm sitting here saying she's probably the strongest individual hacker in the game, which is super cool. It's very interesting, and it feels like a strength that is very appropriate to OSS. I'm a pause for breath. Ollie, what are your thoughts on the
Yeah.
Asura?
I think in my own head, I've spent a long time thinking about how the Assura should function on the table. I've been sort of quietly watching OSS players for a while talk about her. So, firstly, I think the AP Spitfire finally does her justice in terms of a gunfighter. I think one of the core complaints of Aleph players in general has been there's a lack of AP in the faction. So
Mhm.
this corrects that in quite a big way. And then secondly, I think the hacker moving from a damage bonus to +1 SD is absolutely phenomenal and definitely puts her in the top tier. We could have an argument about whether the anathematic is better. It doesn't really matter. She's definitely top two. And yeah, I think I've put her on the table a couple of times. She's really, really powerful, whether you choose to link her or not. Um, the interesting thing about the Asura is at the moment she is very durable. She is quite resistant to hacking, but as we go on and we start talking about Corregidor, one of the things you're going to notice is that there's a lot more EM in the game now in N5 as compared to how there was before.
Yeah.
And the Corregidor profiles are packing a lot of EM themselves, so she does still have some quite defined weaknesses. But I think in terms of the points you're paying, sort of mid 60s, with the profile changes, I think she's just like very good. Not my impression is not, game breaking, but this is the Assura that I've always wanted, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does, and there's a really good point there because there are some profiles when they land and they receive a glow up, and it's easy to like play against them the first time and go, well, that was like my first game against reworked Achilles. Now there were a number of factors in that game, including the fact that Tusa crit me in ARO like 4 times, and then Achilles got to just walk over the rubble. But you play against that the first time and you're like, that is so good. It's so strong because he's fast
Yeah.
and he moves in straight lines, etc. Because that kind of profile is really well configured to break through an unprepared defense. But the Assura
Yeah.
herself, she's not packing visibility mods, she just ignores them in her
No.
opponents. So she takes a whole lot of fair fights. And even the
Yes.
hacking, in a sense, she's very, very good at winning gunfights, at winning hacking fights. She's hard to put down, but the Trinity she's got now it's likely to connect a lot, but it's just damage 6 Trinity,
Yeah.
usual Trinity damage. And there are some things that can weather through that. If you're a profile that has a tin bot attached to your hacker, you might be able to go a few rounds and survive an attack from her. So also, the multi-marksman rifle, as much as it is a nice upgrade, multi-pistol, multi-marksman rifle definitely gives the lieutenant hacker especially the like, I can always do something, but damage
Yeah.
7. It is just damage 7, and that will cause you to have to spend more orders than you would like. So she does definitely feel fair, but I
Yeah.
can see the line now where this was the old like the ghost of Gavin Bateman, who was one of the, at least from Australian
Mhm.
perspective, was an N4 N3 player who kind of, at least inside Australia, he sort of invented what OSS looked like and how they played. And he was Assura centric. He would run like a group 2 Assura with the Lieutenant +1 order profile, and he would find basically she would always do something. There would always be something useful for her to do, whether it was
Yeah.
just spotlighting or gunfighting or discovering. Back in N4 when it was an auto discover on the MSV, etc. And she feels like she leans into that, but with a little bit of modernization for N5 and the demands of N5, what makes a good profile in N5, which is cool.
Mhm. Yeah, she feels N5 ready,
Yeah.
right? I think this profile, I have, I have had problems with her when I've run into multiple hackers, right? Trinity +1 SD is great, but when you're splitting your burst 2 and 2 or 3 and 1 or something
Hmm.
like that, she can run into problems and can get isolated. So,
Yep.
you know, um, I have heard a couple of people kind of lament that this might be the end of hacking, but I'm
No.
not, I'm not totally sure it is.
The reason why I don't think that would be the case is we're gonna go through loads of profiles in Operation Subsection, and one of, well, not loads, but plenty, like 5 more. And one
Hmm.
of the common features is that almost all of them will be hackable. OSS
Yes.
is still a faction that brings lots of hackable targets, and although the Assura is very good at resisting enemy hacking attacks, right? A killer hacker going in against an Assura probably is going to exhaust itself or die unless it's very fit for purpose. But the
Mm.
Assura herself is merely, she's good. She's good at going after enemy hackers, but firewalled or ECM'd enemy hackers, or enemy hackers under a marker state that haven't yet revealed themselves,
Yeah.
you want hacking to ambush OSS remote pieces that are moving up the field. So there's like a balance there, but no, the death of hacking, she is not. It's still very useful.
Yeah. That's how I feel.
All right. We'll jump on to the next profile, which is the Dasyu. So the
Yes.
Dasyu is obviously an existing regiment, but its profile has changed significantly. Um,
Mhm.
do you want to talk through, just to give me a bit of a pause, do you want to talk through how the
Yeah.
Dasyu profile looks now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Daisu that we had before had I believe 2 wounds and like BS 12. And like so it wasn't kind of the best shooter in the world. Now it's been transformed, I think, in purpose quite significantly. So it's gained BS attack +1 special die on everything. So that's just a generic skill that it has on all the profiles, but it's lost the second wound.
Yep.
So what you're getting, I think, is a more brittle but more potent gunfighter. So you can pick, you can have your burst 3 shotgun or you can have your burst 3 sniper. But notably, +1 SD, of course, gives it a much more significant niche as an ARO piece, because that Burst 2 sniper on the MIM6 chassis is really quite strong. And then in terms of other specifics on the profiles, you've got your specialist with the AP submachine gun, and you've got this really neat kind of mine layer 2 with viral mines. So again, that's a nice kind of defensive thing to have. It's also worth noting that one of the profiles has gained a deployable repeater, which significantly ups OSS's hacking projection. And this is something that you're going to see as well on the Naga, I think. Is that one of the profiles we're going through?
We will go through a Naga today, yep.
Yeah. So the Naga's gained this as well. So OSS now has a lot better hacking projection than it did. I don't know how I feel about this change. I liked the Dasyu with 2 wounds because I thought it gave it like an interesting sort of a different feel, because you don't get infiltrators with 2 wounds often. But now I think it does have a defined purpose. The multi-sniper is a great ARO, MIM6, burst 2. And then in the active turn, a submachine gun with burst 4 is actually kind of nasty.
On
So
the
that's my
S13
impression.
with
I like
MIM6,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, right. I like it a lot. Mine layer 2 with viral mines. I haven't actually put that one on the table, but it looks really gross. So yeah, what do you think of it?
It's effectively an entirely new trooper, because the
Yeah.
loss of no wound incapacitation and the change to the gunfighting, fundamentally it's very, very different. Even the 6-2 move change, previously it was 4-4. All of these things enormously adjust how you want to use it, but I think probably, I'm not going to say for the better because it's again fundamentally different, but the really big change is how there are a number of profiles here that have really defined use cases. Whereas the old Dasyu, to justify it, you had to have a use for no wound incapacitation. And on a trooper that was infiltrating hidden deployment, mimetism, etc., MIM6 especially, the use case of no wound cap in cap was never completely clear. Whereas the use case for MIM6 hidden deployment, ballistic skill 13 +1 special die multi-sniper, incidentally with 6-2 move, so it can
Yeah.
reach out from that wherever it might start to potentially get a variety of vectors if it reveals in active turn, is like, oh, damn, yeah, that's a killer piece. That will absolutely kill something, and then probably be just slightly too difficult to put down in ARO. Interesting thing about ballistic skill 13 is that means you can never be reduced to ballistic skill 0. So
Yes.
push comes to shove, you can also, like in a desperate situation, you can be like, it doesn't matter how bad the negatives are, bad range, smoke, mimetism, opponent shooting back at me, I've got 2 dice to roll a 1 with, or 2
Yep.
dice to roll a 4 or a 7, and on a multi-sniper, that's scary. The pieces that leap out to me, the 2 that I would reach for first, and just in terms of like what's jumping off the page, are the multi-sniper, potentially, but there is another profile that is doing something similar when we get to the Nagas that I would choose between, and I have a little bit of a tendency personally to like models that start on the table because they generate an order. That's just it's a personal failing, frankly, is that I cannot play with fewer orders than I might hypothetically be able to reach maximally. But never mind that. The other one is the mine layer, especially just because of how the mine layer is a piece that is going to impact games even if it's not taken. Because when we get to Nagas, and this is a faction that has Dart in them as Dart in it as well, there are so many different collections of a pair of Mimetism 3 camouflage markers that project wildly different threats. Like even just Dart is, among other things, potentially a mine layer and a specialist and herself durable and has an MSV, which means I have had a game where I'm like, I don't want to deal with whatever that is, I'll throw a smoke grenade. And then I remember that Dart existed in the faction I was playing against. And then she ambushed a piece that was trying to go and press a button,
Yep.
and it was a pain. And so the Dasyu being able to deploy 2 viral mines adds one more thing to the list of things you have to think about potentially existing when an OSS player deploys 2, 4, 6 camouflage markers, and you're trying to puzzle through what could be what. That's really cool. The
Yeah.
sniper will probably be the one that gets the most complaints because it's going to reveal in ARO, and people are just not going to be able to kill the damn thing. Someone will try and gunfight it with a heavy machine gun and just lose 4 face-to-face rolls in a row. and then get onto the Discord to complain. That's a prediction we can just make right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right that OSS's shell game has taken a significant step up when we look at both the Dasyu and the Naga and their mine layer options
Yeah.
combined with Dart. You're absolutely correct. One of the things I do want to add as well, just point it out here, um, they have gained the Pulsar on a couple of profiles. That
Yes.
means that the hacking profile can now do a true actual hard fork, not just a soft fork against heavy infantry. So if they reset, you just Pulsar. If they dodge, you hack them. I guess they can always try and shoot you, but with surprise attack, Mim 6, that's not great. So this is a profile that can do proper hard forks on things.
The presence of armor piercing on those submachine guns is a big deal as well, because every
Yes.
single one of these profiles can roll up its sleeves, like as long as it's not fighting something with a shotgun, or something with a template rather, that can just be like, fuck it, you're worth 30 points, I'll just template you.
Yeah.
Being able to move fast, move 6 inches from a starting point, potentially around a corner, and catch something with, like, if they get you out of cover, 4 dice on 16s, and you're -12 before range bands with the surprise attack, cover, and mimetism. That's a shockingly dangerous, just face-to-face roll with the gun off of the hacking profiles or whatever.
Yeah.
So
It's really good. I like them.
expensive. Like 30, all of them are at best high 30s, and the pieces will probably play a lot are north of 30 or 30 points for the viral mine layer.
Mm.
But like I can see games where you take the viral mine layer because mine layer 2 is just an enormously fun skill, and then at some point during the game that thing reveals and dives someone with 4 dice with the AP submachine gun, and it's like, oh yeah, actually this is not just a mine layer, it's a lethal gunfighter if it gets inside 8. So really cool
Yeah.
profile, really cool. And to pair with it, I think the next one up we have, okay, next one is technically the Dikpala, but I think we're going to just jump along until we get to the Nagas. I didn't put
We
these in
do
any
that.
particular
Yeah.
order, but I think the natural thing to do is to talk about the Nagas next, because this is the second half of the OSS shell game. And for people who are watching the video and have seen me scroll through several things, not to worry, we'll jump back up to the Dikpala shortly. But the Naga, definitely a much less changed profile, but with some significant adjustments. And now
Mm.
it's paired with, especially the Dasyu, and especially things like the Dasyu mine layer and the revised Dart that we got in October. Ollie, profiles that leap out to you with the Naga.
Okay, so firstly, I adore the Naga. I really, really love the changes that the Naga's gone through. I like the hacker with the carbonite upgrade and the dep reps. I
Yep.
think deployable repeaters are so important in N5. And again, it's been lovely to see Aleph have better hacking projections, so I love that profile. Um, I'm also a fan of the sniper again. It does a similar thing to the Desu. It's the budget version, I
Yep.
suppose. And the monofilament mine layer I'm interested in. I haven't thought too much about that one, but it's one that I'm interested in. I think it could be cool on the table, particularly if you're playing against a faction that's rolling around with like tags, flyers, whatever. You know, the ability to do just send something straight to dead. It's quite interesting.
The, I am going to, I don't even know what the list is yet, but I am going to write a
Yeah.
list that has 1 or 2 monofilament mine layers in, and it will do exactly the same thing that happened the last time I tried to do that with O12, who have the razor mine layers, which is nothing. I get intimately familiar with the fact that monofilament is damage 8, I think, and my opponents
Yeah.
just pass all of their saves. But I will nevertheless try it. And you have this effect, it's just like we mentioned with the Desu, where the existence of this profile impacts games even if it isn't taken. Because now, okay, those 2 camouflage markers that are kind of close to one another, they could be Dart and a mine, they could be 2 viral mines, or they could be monofilament. And there are pieces that, like, if you're playing Caledonia and you're yeeting a dog warrior forward, you care not for monofilament, but you are fucking terrified of accidentally triggering and failing a dodge against a viral mine. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
there's just this effect now where it's like nobody gets a free lunch against OSS's midfield. You have to either hit it with very, very disposable elements and just tease it out that way, or clear it carefully, and that buys time and space and makes the fog of war really effective, which is something that they didn't have an effective fog of war before, like before
No.
being, previous editions, because it was just like, well, yeah, those mines are probably those things under camouflage markers are just Nagas, and now there's many things they could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And before the mine layer Naga was just the shock mine. Now, obviously, it's monofilament as
Yep.
well. So
Yep.
you're starting, in deployment with significantly more lethal deployables.
Yep.
Um,
I
but
like
yeah,
your.
I'm a big fan
Right.
of the transformation for both of these profiles. I think it's really important for the faction.
It's interesting how, because the Naga profile is fundamentally unchanged. These are all
Yeah.
of the same stats that a Naga always had. Good fizz, average ballistic skill, mimetism, like dogged, etc. But +1 special die on Carbonite as an ARO means that a midfield camouflage marker is now very like if it's a hacker, it's very likely to connect. The fact that it's
Mm.
a midfield camouflage marker that can also place deployable repeaters means that although the Naga, it's not a hacker and killer hacker, but if it's alive in your active turn and you have an Assura in the backfield, it projects actually a stronger threat than if it was a killer hacker itself. You have to judge the distances with the deployable repeater correctly, but that's really solid. I like I
Mm.
like the multi-sniper as well, as much as it's not actually enormously cheaper than the Dasyu. Um, as noted, I'm a bit of a sucker for having 15 orders at the end of the game if I can. I need to break myself of the habit, but she is a piece that is a little bit cheaper than the Dasyu, and she adds one more of those things to models under camouflage, where your opponent, almost in a sense, again, you take her in a couple of games and opponents will quickly learn it could be a monofilament mine, it could be a viral mine, it could be a Naga with a shotgun, or
Mm.
it could be a Naga with a multi-sniper. And that's really cool. And then of course at some point you're going to have the meme list where you hidden deploy a Dasyu and then you hidden deploy a second Dasyu in the same location and then you deploy the Naga multi-sniper in that same location and then your opponent
Yeah.
reveals the Naga and you fire 6 dice in ARO as all of them just like split out, and that's very dumb. Don't do that. That is so many points and SWC on a bit, but someone at some point will run that.
It's funny though. Someone should do this. Yeah.
Just
When I was working on the Naga, one of the things about the Naga's lore is that they're supposed to be kind of like expert guerrilla fighters that slow down the opponent
mhm.
and have a really wide armory to choose from. So when I saw the addition of all of these different types of deployables, so you've got the deployable repeater, you've got EM mines, mono mines, shock mines, I was really, really happy because I think that it fits the fluff for what Nagas are supposed to do.
Yep.
But on the table, it's incredibly helpful. In a matchup, you can say, okay, maybe I want the EM mines instead of the monofilament mine. Great, there's a profile for that. Maybe you want the hacking projection. Great, there's a profile for that as well. So you get to pick what fixes your list.
There's one other point I want to make about these actually, just before we jump on to more OSS stuff, and that's to note that Nagas are, at least time of recording, they're not restricted just to OSS and Aleph. They're also a profile that appears at least in Shock Army of Acontecimento, and Acontecimento actually stand potentially to benefit a lot from these changes. There was an old archetype, like back in the day, where you could run a really nice, clean shock army list where you would combine Nagas and Dart, and this is like N3, back when Dart first dropped, and she was fantastic, and then she sort of lulled, and then she's back. Um,
Mm.
you could run Nagas, Peacemakers, and Dart, and have this like it does everything midfield for a relatively attractive cost. And that has lapsed over time, not least at the beginning of N5 when Acontecimento didn't exist. But in N5 today, you don't find yourself running that as much in
Mm.
Acontecimento because there are other pieces that you reach for, and the demands of what a troop slot needs to perform is a little bit different. But these changes, plus the changes to Dart, we don't have Dasus. We don't have the Dasu Ballistic Skill 13 Mim 6 multi-sniper,
Mm.
but we do have access to the Naga multi-sniper and monofilament mines on the Naga. If you want to combine a Peacemaker mine layer with a Naga monofilament mine layer and you just keep some common zones of control off of the mine laying Oxbot, you get to project interesting threats off of multiple mines. And that's potentially really interesting for Shock Army, in addition to all of this stuff about OSS, and the versatility of the Naga profile, being able to do so many things, even like the deployable repeater hacker, I could see running in OS in
Yeah.
Acontecimento, because it's really potentially good for that faction.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Hadn't thought of that.
Cool. I like these. I like these especially in conjunction with the Dasyu, the midfield of OSS, and there'll be one more profile we'll get to as well, but we'll go back to the new Dakinis first. I really, really
Mm-hmm.
like these. I think these are really cool. All right, we're going to
Yeah.
jump back up to Dikpala
To
tacbots.
Yeah, so these are Dakinis
Yeah,
really. They've
they
gained
are.
ECM hacker. That's what it is. Interestingly, I believe the submachine gun Panzerfaust with a repeater profile is new.
It is.
Um, I think that's an incredible profile, to be honest with you. I think it's incredible because it gives you your immediate turn zero deployment phase repeater, which is incredibly helpful.
Hmm.
It's cheap, and it's very easy to get a +1 SD Panzerfaust on a MIM3 body that you could also buff up with an Evo if you wanted to. So I think that's a really interesting, cool profile that helps the deployment phase of OSS and Aleph.
Having a remote presence, mimetism pace. I'm not going to jump back up to the roster in this faction, but we still have posthumans in OSS.
Yes.
So this is a faction that, assuming posthumans, again, who knows how things will change, but at least at present, posthumans represent a very good willpower engineer, and even if in future they don't, Sophatech still exists, etc. So OSS is a faction that can make really good use of force reconstitution, and remote presence is one of the tools that makes that work. Anytime you can staple a cheap trooper into a team to give it some nice bonuses, to contribute to the bonuses the team gets, yeah, repeater, submachine gun, Panzerfaust, that's a very clean, it's a very lean profile. It's probably not like strictly better than the combi rifle, but the utility is much higher. And then, of course, we still have the SWC weapons that we'll use with marksmanship, etc.
I'm
So
a
yeah,
sucker for a utility piece. I love them. And I just think these cheap, like 13-point utility pieces can go in so many lists and just give you something quite powerful.
where the repeater Dikpala stands out for me is that, particularly in a faction like OSS, a lot of the time I'll be like, yes, I will reach for 7-point flash pulse remotes to be 7-point orders with repeaters. But they are fundamentally a very passive element. They're mostly there for deployment zone repeater coverage, which is well and good and useful. But if I can spend, sometimes I'll have points spare. And if I can spend 6 more points to get all of the same utility, but now a fire team is moving the repeater forward, and it's contributing to fire team bonuses, and it's potentially an ARO piece, that's 6 points of utility over a flash pulse remote that can be well worth finding. So
Yeah,
just a nice little
yeah.
thing.
It makes your list a nightmare to hack, right? Because the Dikpala itself has ECM hacker -3, and you've got the repeater, so you're going to have to go against the Assura that's going to hack you back.
There are killer hackers, I want to say, that can be linked, because the Dynavis has a KHD profile, at least at present, and she is still linkable. So there's also the old combination of a killer hacker duoed with a repeater, where you have the fire team activate, and the Dikpala dives onto the enemy hacker. The enemy hacker might
Yeah,
choose to respond against the Dikpala, but if they're doing so, they're competing with ECM. They get a free KHD. It's a niche
right.
interaction, but um,
Yeah, it
mo
can be really powerful at times.
six full repeaters that are moving as part of fire teams is just useful. It's just useful in addition
Yeah.
to everything else.
Mhm.
All right, we'll jump on to the next
Cool.
one now, which is so this is the third part of the midfield puzzle that I alluded to before, which is the Kinnara scoutbot, and that is an enormous pile of rules. can,
Yeah.
can you decode some of this for us?
Yeah, sure. So to me, the Kinnara it's kind of a close combat troop. You can see you've got your CC-23, and then in the skills you've got martial arts, and in weapons you've got a monofilament weapon. It deploys with decoy, so it's got decoy 2. Um, they're all specialists. They're all very mobile. So they have climbing plus and they dodge +2 inches. And then it takes on some of the traits of the forward observer bot. So you've got sensor on it, which is really important. And then combined, you've got good movement with 6-2 and things like that. So it's almost like in some ways a counter skirmisher, because you've got your sensor, you've got your decoys and things to waste time. But then, of course, you've got the loadout itself. So you've got heavy flamethrowers, so you can auto hit things, and you've got the great CC. And then you get to pick between infiltration or parachutist. Apart from that, I think it kind of feels to me like I don't know, like a one wound CC troop that is good against other camouflage markers.
Yeah, that tracks. What leaps out to me a little bit is, so firstly, there are some significant limitations on the profile, which is if it gets into close combat, it's got quite a good face-to-face roll, including one that it can
Mm.
fork with a heavy flamethrower. But monofilament has fundamental, it's either incredible or it's damage 8 and your opponent rolls a 7.
Yeah.
So you will have to be prepared for the, like, this was the real one, and it moves 6 inches and gets into close combat and has that rare game where it triggers surprise off of the back of a decoy, and stacks all of these negative modifiers, and then your opponent passes the save, and you're like, okay, well, cool, whatever,
Mm.
you're in CC now. But infiltrating sensors are really useful. And
Mhm.
Vulcan Shotgun, Heavy Flamethrower, 3 of these things presenting decoys. 25 points is a little bit rich for
Mhm.
3 models that could be concealing flamethrowers, but they are remote presence, and we do have engineers in the faction,
Yes.
in addition to the sensor utility. And then finally, and this is probably the thing that makes them something I will consider, only rarely but will consider, is that they are mine layer with EM mines. And they will be telegraphed. It's not like all of the other camouflage markers which fully conceal their identities. But if you have one Kinnara scoutbot and say it's spread out, it and its decoys are spread out over 2 rooftops, that is a lot of area in which any of the camouflage markers in those zones of control could be an EM mine. And
Mm.
EM mines being added to the mix of viral monofilament and shock that OSS can put out is one more thing that occupies your opponent's headspace, even if the Kinnara otherwise just does nothing and stays on a rooftop the entire game. So
Yeah.
there's utility there. The sensor is probably the biggest thing. Sometimes a
Mm.
midfield sensor just wins the game.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I also like the parachutists just because they bring eclipse,
Mhm.
which is, obviously very helpful. But the ability to parachutist on eclipse, so if you need it on the left flank, you get it on the left. If you need it on the right flank, you instantly get it on the right. I think that's really powerful as well.
6-2 move gives you a little bit of it gives you 14 inches in off the table edge to be able to place an eclipse profile on the second order.
Yeah.
Which of the 2 Kinnara parachutists? I would probably lean more toward the EM carbine one, I
Mm.
think. Just because I find that parachutists tend to, the ideal use case is often coming on behind something. Which of them would you normally reach for?
Yeah, I agree entirely. EM carbine, because you just have that fantastic opportunity to get something in the back with EM.
Yeah.
And I think in the N5 metagame, that's just so helpful because there's so many heavy infantry tags and flyers and things like that all over the place.
Yeah, being able to, and carbines have the 8 to 16 inch, like they're good out to 16 inches, which means that
Yes.
you can come on with a parachutist. You can maybe use specialist to move, stealth to move at some juncture, and take that 2 shots in the back against something with no chance to respond. Even a
Mm.
flyer with really high mimetism, because they aren't getting to respond, they won't be able to use dodge -3 or fire back at you, which means that you're rolling, probably 2 dice on 9s with an EM carbine if it's Mimetism 6 flyer, but 2 dice on 9s is still likely to hit, and you only need to tag a flyer with EM once to just brick it and then at your leisure to deal with. So I'm not a big parachutist person, but parachutist with a sensor, parachutist with Eclipse, parachutist with an EM carbine, and who is a specialist in 6-2 and some decent close combat, there's enough there. Particularly someone who loves the model and wants to field it, because the little the Marut, it's got all the Marut vibes about it with like the face and everything. Is really really cool. I really like. So there's a use case here, and it's just good enough at close combat as well that like worst case scenario can stealth into CC with something, especially under
Yeah.
Eclipse. So yeah, cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a player that's good enough to make this profile seem absolutely horrendous. And I'd love to see it.
There's a bunch of utility, like particularly if we see more radial. One of the things that is happening a little bit in Australia is people are just experimenting to see where radial can be applied to just be a scenario variant. And it's by no means universal, but at Border Bash coming up, it's an event that's happening in Australia in June. One of the fifth round is unmasking played on a radial deployment with 16 inches between the consoles.
Okay.
And firstly, it works shockingly well, but then secondly, the whole dynamic of unmasking and the radial deployment, you've got all of this space, including space that's very close to deployment zone edges, to put and hide HVTs. And the new
Yeah.
scenario in the ITS season, the I can't remember the name of it, but the one that includes using paramedics and stuff to do the same thing.
Yes.
What it is very, very easy to hide key elements close to table edges, which all of a sudden ramps up the utility of parachutists who are very good in radial deployments because they have all of this space that they can appear on.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I can see that.
something interesting there. All right.
Mm.
Moving on to, so Nagas we've already covered, so moving on to our next profile, and these are the ones that we mentioned when we were talking about the fire teams. These are the Sharvara houndbots, and they join basically every fire team where they have pure fire team bonuses.
Mhm.
There's quite a lot that works toward a very singular goal here, I feel. Talk me through your perspective of the Sharvara.
Well, so I'm a hacker slum player at heart. So I really enjoy cheap cheap elements that can punch above their weight, and I think that's absolutely what the Sharvara does. All of the profiles are bringing Emirats, which are terrifying template weapons. And then you get to pick between like shotguns or riot stoppers and things. They're also very, very fast. They're 6'6", which puts them in the sort of upper echelons of movement. They've got decent CC 22 with CC attack -6, but they dodge incredibly. So that's what I saw immediately. They're dodging on 15s and they dodge 4 inches. And combined with that, they have super jump. So you can actually move kind of, I think, 8 inches on the first move if you don't need cover. So I've played them. I've played them as deployment zone guards with the 15.1 because it's cheap. It's incredibly cheap. But I've also put them in fire teams and kind of use them to like push up and threaten a fork and stuff to clear some things out. And then after that, the gunfighter or the specialist can go in. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I had so these are interesting to appraise because if you don't think at all, I think the fire teams are actually a little bit important to conceiving of them. If you ignore the fire teams at all and you just think, what damage could I do with a Sharvara? The answer is, well, some, because they've most of the profiles that you would reach for. I think the profiles that you would generally be reaching for here will be probably most of the time just the cheapest one. The 15 point,
Mhm.
there's a little bit of flex, so you should change your mind there, but I like the combination of a heavy riot stopper and an Emirat because it means you have a mobility kill threat off of a very large template against basically everything. There is,
Yes.
I don't think there's anything in the game that can comfortably shrug or not worry about both of those two. You have like warhorses warhorse infantry who don't care about the Emirat and can push through that, but they can't push through a riot stopper. You have immunity arm, or immunity only immunity enhanced doesn't care about either of these, and those are very
Mhm.
few and far between. You have things like dog
Yeah.
warriors and Norkias running at you who might not care about the riot stopper, but will get stalled out by being isolated by the Emirat. And so, okay, cool, that's good. It is non-lethal. What do we do that sort of like tacks on the top? How do we capitalize? What damage can be done? And that's where you go, well, look, this is fine. It is fine in close combat. CC22, CC attack -6 just pushes up into this is okay, and it is an average damage, but still DA CCW. That's okay. That's a good little piece for 15 points. What makes the difference here, for me, is that you get this good little piece for 15 points. 15 points is just expensive enough that, like, you're having to spend a couple more over a Dikpala, for example. But these things join both of your major fire teams, and they count as pure. So
Yeah.
there will just be opportunities. Like, I don't know how good a Samarthan fire team is going to go. I can make some reasonable assessments about what a Dikpala fire team will be like. And
Mhm.
if you run a Dikpala gun and one of these lads, and then just to put like a Denavas, if you're willing to roll 2 dice pitches or something, um,
Mhm.
this is a piece that moves up the field. You could almost do, if we're just going 3-person pure team, there's a little bit of a concept of like building readouts in the middle of the field. And having a Dakini team that's like Dakini gun, Dakini repeater, and one of these things, you can just build a presence with those 3 little goblins in the midfield where you have these templates and a repeater, and it's all moving forward quickly, and all of it is not particularly expensive. Now, you're exposing multiple single wound troopers there, but it's a layer of defense that starts the game. Like, you just have template deployment, good quality mobility kill deployment zone template weapons, nice, and the ability to move them forward and play around with them and dodge in reactive, especially. So it's a really cool piece.
Yeah. So a fire team that I really like, you can do Dikpala with the repeater.
Mhm.
You can do the Sharvara, the cheap one, to go with it, which gives you your templates. And then you can do like you can do a rickshaw with the HRL. So you
Yep,
get your pure linked HRL for +1 SD. You've got template cover over that fire team from the Sharvara, and you've got hacking cover as well
yep,
through the Dikpala's repeater, which is like that's a really nice reactive and active fire team.
yeah, yep. One of these, I think one of these comes in the Mazebreaker box, and
I believe so, yeah.
yeah, it was on the art. With people being like, "Is this a dinosaur?" Like, oh, it's maybe it's something. It shares one of the things they've done with the art. We can see in the profile, the piece in profile here, we can see that it's using those like OSS musculature. But the art on the Mazebreaker box looked actually a lot like the steel jaws in Next Wave.
Yeah.
So there was some just back and forth about that. But no, it's an awesome little houndbot. Very cool concept.
Mhm.
And yeah, just useful. It's been a while since we've seen, it's been an edition, actually, since we've seen the horrible goblin that dodges 4 inches in reactive turn and puts a template down where you didn't want it profile. Not since Tega creatures were very reasonably scaled back. And there's going to be those games where like this thing is in zone of control and it just rolls the 12 -3 +3 moves 4 inches, and then you're like, oh, there's now 3 things potentially being faced down by an Emerat or a Riot Stopper, and so you have to pause the whole turn to stop and deal with the
Yeah.
Sharvara and like pull the glue out of everyone's hair and etc. So I've got a lot of time for that kind of the profile that can just stall out an opponent, and mobility kill templates, specifically that mobility kills something as it reaches your deployment zone. That's the point where your opponent has spent 2 or 3 or 4 orders to get there, and now the turn is gone because that's too many
Yeah.
orders to constitute a new attack. And then the pieces they attacked with is mobility killed in the deployment zone. Now they will like you avoid a piece that's got an Emerat in a DZ, but cool, you're funneling your opponent. They avoid a piece that has an Emerat in a DZ. Even just in terms of like flyer deterrence, where flyers are very strong, they're very aggressive, they move very quickly, but often on tables that I play at least, some of the very dangerous flyer runs that can happen do still involve a flyer shooting at quite close range because it has to zip up over cover and plunge fire directly down. And if you
Yeah.
have a model that can dodge 4 inches and is armed with an Emerat and a Riot Stopper, that represents a terminal end to the run of a flyer if it positions itself to respond to stuff. So, useful.
Yeah. Yeah. Very useful.
All
Very
right.
useful.
Now, that is effectively everything in OSS. As I have put the Shukra consultant up on screen because it was distributed to content creators. However, it's a Shukra consultant. It hasn't changed. It has
Yeah.
a really sick new model. I really like that artwork,
Mhm.
but it's completely unchanged. I'm not exactly. I suppose they shared this with us because this profile appears in the Macebreaker box. Um,
Yes.
but it is the same Shukra that it has always been. I feel somewhat, how do I put this? Somewhat overtaken by other profiles in N5, but not bad. It's just not a
Yeah.
magistrate.
Yeah, I would just it's fine. It's a Shukra. It does what Shukras have always done. The new profile, sorry, the new model looks great. That's it.
I really like that, like, suit into the mask suit juxtaposition. But this is a video about profile analysis and identity of the factions, and not Rob thinks cool masks combined with like
Yeah,
suits with LEDs in them are sick. So that's all of our OSS stuff. We're just about an hour in, which means we're tracking well. And
cool.
to recap just very slightly, I'm sort of scrolling out through these. One of the things, the trends that I think we've noticed, and stop me if there's anything sort of you disagree with, there's more fireteam flexibility than before. Although I wouldn't say
Mhm.
at this stage, from the information that I have, nothing I would say is transformative about how the fire teams work. Just there is flexibility. We're waiting probably to see how certain other things shake out before we can say, based on public information, the operations fire team is fantastic and does this thing. The Samarthan fire team is fantastic and does this thing. But there are building blocks there that are significant.
Yes.
Probably the
I think
oh yeah.
sorry, I was just going to say the big change for me, not necessarily in fire teams, but it's just about previously it felt quite, to me, it felt quite easy to push into OSS
Yes.
offensively, and it wasn't a whole lot they could do about it. And I think with the changes to the infiltrators and the addition of the Sharvara and some of the fire team changes, that let you fire team repeaters and stuff, that package combined means it's now a lot less safe to push into an OSS player on turn one.
I absolutely agree, and that actually leads me into what I think is the biggest overall change for subsection based on the information we have here. Truly transformative changes to how their midfield works. The
Yes.
you don't have to go into any of those things if you want to build a very direct and straightforward OSS list. You can build good quality deployment zone defenses with repeaters and templates now in a way that you couldn't before. But if you want to lean a little or a lot on the OS midfield, it is terrifying to try and mentally contemplate all of the possible things that the infiltration areas of the board could be holding for an operations list. And even just the ARO potential in a radial scenario of either of the snipers, but especially the Dasyu, where sniper range bands tend to have play, is something that people will have to be prepared for because the
Mm.
potential there is tremendous, which is really cool.
Mm.
All
Yeah,
right.
it's very powerful. Yeah.
So that's Operation Subsection. What we're going to do now is jump into, scrolling down through all of these, into Corregidor.
Mm.
And I have the first of two Corregidor rosters on screen now, with only one significant unknown, but it's a really big one. That is that there are now two Corregidor fire teams. They have two divisions of Corregidor, Jurisdictional Command, a Deep Space Division. That's on screen now, but it is literally just Corregidor as it currently exists. Those are all the Corregidor profiles. They are everything that we know exists in Corregidor. That is 2025 April Corregidor. It's May at time of recording. But then we jump down a slide and we can see the Surface Division Jurisdictional Command of Corregidor, where there are many common elements. They've still got McMurrah, they've still got Jazz and Billy, Gromos, etc. But also, this is where all of the new troopers live. And it is very unclear what the heck that means in terms of how particularly tournament play works for Corregidor. Now, Ollie, we've spoken about this a little bit off stream.
Mm.
There are probably some boundaries around what you can talk about here, I would imagine.
Actually, I don't know.
Oh, great. In that case,
The
go
honest
ahead and
answer, I
speculate,
don't know.
please.
Yeah. So we can see that there are two different rosters for Corgi. You've got your surface and you've got your deep space. I don't know how it works. I have speculated that because it's still one sectorial, you can, if you're entering a tournament, you can have a surface list and a deep space list. Speculation. Some questions I put to you, Rob, before we started streaming were, do you have to tell your opponent straight away whether you're playing surface or deep space? I don't know, but because there's an overlap in profiles, there could be a shell game there. And the other thing I was thinking is, well, yeah, it's just around declaration and when you get to pick and things like that. I'm not sure, but there's an opportunity there for some interesting, trickery. Um, but yeah, apart from that, I'm not sure.
How I hope it works is, I hope at least that when you're attending a tournament and you're picking your faction, jurisdictional command of Corregidor is the faction that you pick, and you can run one list of each if you want to, or
Yeah.
two lists of one, etc. So that if you want, and I genuinely think that's kind of important. Just from, I'll be a little bit disappointed if they don't do it that way. Firstly, just because
Mm,
there's so much overlap, but secondly, from a like pro-consumer perspective, because if someone out there is a Corregidor player and they're like, I'm so fucking keen for MAZEBREAKER, and
yeah.
then this drops and they get told that actually yes they can buy MAZEBREAKER and they can use half of their existing models, but if they want to play Surface Division Corregidor they can't use their awesome painted Tomcat anymore, they have to play old Corregidor to do that. It's not
Mm,
the same as saying they can't use their old army, but it sort of would, I would expect it would very slightly sour the
yes.
arrival of these new troops. And given that there is so much commonality, like when someone rolls up to the table and they go, "Hi, I'm playing jurisdictional command of Corregidor." That's the fact, and that's if you can play two lists. By definition, you wouldn't be able to tell your opponent at that point what division you are playing. But
Yes.
I think that would be fine because your opponent with both of these armies is still going, all right, I have to think about Moran Maasai Hunters, I have to think about McMurrah, they're common to both. And then I have to
Mm,
think broadly around the themes that both of these subfactions could bring, but they're not enormously different. The drop troops that each faction can bring down, for example, are different, but present threats in their own ways. You can sort of contemplate that
yes.
singularly. The tags aren't enormously different, etc. So that's my hope.
I would hope for that
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
Um, I
Should also mention in terms of exclusions, because there are a couple of important exclusions. Um, it appears that the Raven Eye is going from both lists,
uh
from what
huh.
I can see, and it also appears that both the Lunacod and the Cyclone aren't on these lists.
That's
Um,
correct. Very possibly an oversight, but because these are just produced for publication, basically produced
yeah.
for content creators. But yes, I think the Raven Eye is a particularly good point there because there's a lot of things that
Mm,
that can be useful for. Um, but
yeah.
yeah,
But so you've got your two different Corregidor lists, and I wish I could tell you more, but I don't know myself
yeah.
what it actually means.
In terms of just notable things that do exist in deep space that don't, I'm just looking back and forward. Intruders are present in both. I think that's quite significant. The tag
Hmm.
loadout is subtly different. We've got iguanas in both. Very, very good tag. Geckos in both. Gators only exist in the deep space division. Um,
Yeah.
a gator is, I think, particularly in Corregidor, it is a compelling profile in terms of like, do you have a plan for making use of your lieutenant orders, etc. The iguana is fantastic on its merits, and in a vacuum, I would very, very happily take if I was picking just one. But there is some sort of point of difference there. Otherwise, it's basically all of the new things. All of the new things are in
Yeah.
Surface Division, and
Yeah.
they displace some of the old stuff. So let's
Yeah.
talk about Surface Division fire teams. Um,
Yeah.
we don't, just for those who are wondering or watching the video, we don't have any visibility of the Space Division fire teams. You can operate on the assumption that they'll stay as they are. I would actually expect them to change because there is really significant flexibility on display here in the Surface Division teams. Like, really significant, especially in the Corregidor fire team, but also to an extent in the correctional.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes. So one of the big complaints or laments that Corregidor players have had for an additional two now is, where has the flexibility in fire teams gone?
Hmm.
Well, looking at this immediately, the thing that jumps out is that Corregidor keyword, which is shared between the Alguaciles, Mobile Brigada, Territorials, Coyote, Lobos, etc., and the Bamboo Droid. Big changes here, because it does mean that you can get some fantastic low-cost utility duos straight away.
Yep. Oh yeah, like tremendously. And we will go through like a lot of this in this context now before we go through the profiles won't make a tremendous amount of sense. But coyotes, bomber droids, territorials are all profiles that leap out to me as having some,
Mhm.
particularly having some of that utility as a duo. Even the Daktari has the Corregidor fire team rather than Alguacil fire team, for example. And that's also something that we'll mention when we get to one of these profiles a bit further down the line. So
Yes.
I
Yeah.
do find it's absolutely hilarious that Wildcats, polyvalent tactical regiment. For those who are unfamiliar with what the word polyvalent means, it's a chemistry term that means it can form bonds with many things. Valency being the ability to form a chemical bond, I think, poly meaning many. Of course, Wildcats don't have the keyword. That's just hilarious at this particular juncture. But we could potentially, maybe they'll have that in, maybe they'll finally have that in Space Division.
I would speculate the Space Division seems to be the like old Corregidor stuff with all the cats, Wildcats, Tomcats, Hellcats, etc.
Hmm.
It's the Surface Division that has the new stuff.
Yep.
I would speculate that the Wildcats are going to have a more secure home in the Space Division than the
I
Surface
I
Division.
hope so. We have a local Corregidor player who is a genuine champ. He's a wonderfully painted army, and he's a wildcat tragic. And I've learned to actually respect them a little bit as a result. But they are still like, wow, that piece is single wound with no mods, and it's dead
Yeah.
again. But sometimes they perform, and he just really likes them, and I want them to work a little better for him than they do.
I think we all do, Rob.
Yep.
You know, I think we all do.
But yeah, so looking at this, the big story is that Corregidor fire team. It can be core, it can be Haris, it can be duo. It's more at level flexibility just about, and
Yeah.
there are many interesting things that can join that. The only other thing that I'll note, I've got a little bit red text there, is just in terms of wild cards, quite a lot of wild cards as well. Valerio Gromos, for example, makes a quite nice wild card. Jazz FTO is present, so we've got some linked pitches, for example. A bit less good these days than they used to be because of the range band changes, but still useful to have. You were talking before about how you feel that deployable repeaters are more important, and I have come to agree
Mhm.
because you don't need to roll two dice on eights and go, Um,
Yeah.
but the only thing I think is really significant here about wildcards is when we get to the shifter profile, we will bear in mind that that is a wildcard. It's built to be a wildcard. And the Stemplazond has no FTO restrictions.
Yes.
Stemplazonds can't link actually in many Nomad factions at the moment. They're only, I think, linkable in Tunguska, and they have this very annoying Namnenyik sub-profile that doesn't have tactical awareness is the only thing that can link. There is no FTO restriction on the Stemplazond in wildcards for Surface Division, which means if nothing else changes, you have the wonderful tactical awareness, sensor, forward observer, utility piece as a wildcard, which makes any faction that can access it better. So that's just something to bear in mind.
I can reveal that I have played against a Gecko plus Stempler Harris team. It was disgusting. Six orders across three troops, and obviously you've got your specialists, you've got your repeaters, you've got sensor, and you've got a Gecko.
Yep.
It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. So Corregidor players, like, there's a lot to love about this fire team chart.
Even just like I don't think I will duo iguanas, even though that does sound filth, but I will absolutely duo an iguana with a Stemplazond. That's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that's good. That's just a really good use of points. So I can see when I was doing my first. So as I mentioned, I haven't been able to deep dive into these profiles, but I've had a little bit of a look, like over the last couple of days. And my expectation initially was I had a quick glance and I went, oh, there's a bunch of single wound dudes there in the Nomad stuff. Whatever, I'll come back to that.
Hmm.
Which was a misappraisal, but I expected to be more excited about the OSS stuff, and I am really excited about like the OSS midfield in particular. It tickles my fancy. But coming back to these Corregidor things and looking at these fire teams, and then at some of the profiles that we're going to go through, I want to play some Surface Division. It
Yeah.
appeals to me, which is really cool. All right,
Mm.
let's get
Yeah.
to.
Well, let's
I
go to the first profile.
Yep, which is just a profile that already exists in the game. Thank you very much, Corvus Belli.
Yeah.
But because a bandit appears in the box, and it's a new bandit sculpt with a cool mask, is the bandit. I don't think there's any. This is
Exactly.
literally just the bandit profile that already exists.
There are some very subtle changes
Ah, what are
here.
they?
I'm gonna bring up the bandit just to make sure I'm correct. Yeah. Okay. So it swaps BS attack +1 burst for +1 SD.
I thought it
So
was
that
plus
makes
one.
it.
That is a big deal. Yep.
So yeah. So that makes it like much more compelling when it's AR rowing.
Hmm.
And they appear to have gone down like a point, maybe two, and that's kind of it.
Interesting that +1 special die. That would be because of the special die to burst change. It's interesting that +1 burst costs less than +1 special die. I can see why
Yeah.
they do have template weapons, and it is meaningfully different there. But I would almost always prefer +1 special die otherwise. That is a good point, though. I looked at that and I thought, oh, bandits have that already, but you're absolutely correct. And even a 1-point adjustment is nice. +1 special die makes especially all of those adhesive launcher rifles as ARO pieces just a little bit scarier. Like a lot
Yeah.
scarier. Actually,
Definitely.
like a lot. Actually, a lot scarier.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which is
So
cool.
it's still the bandit that we know, but I guess the special die just makes the ARO more potent.
Yeah.
That's it, really.
I'm not much of a bandit person normally, just because ultimately irregulars are always going to be something that in most factions you can't take tons of. And I found that Corregidor especially, I was often quite constrained with how many they felt like historically, which would be Space Division Corregidor, felt like it had an even tighter constraint on how many irregulars it could take compared to other factions, and one of them was almost always going to be McMurrough. And so
Yeah.
bandits historically I haven't played with much, but +1 special die means that if I don't do anything with them and don't act with them, they still have a reactive roll, which is just it's a small but relevant change. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Also, effectively, so moving on just to Alguaciles, these are profiles that are in addition to the existing Alguacile profiles, which is to say, basically, the only Alguacile profile you would usually take in Corregidor was like maybe you would take
Mm.
sometimes a lieutenant, but many modern Corregidor players, I would say, would avoid that if they can. And then occasionally you'll see a paramedic or some link glue of some description. These are new Alguacile Gata profiles. They just count as Alguaciles. And
Mhm.
there's some. I don't think these are transformative, but there's some interesting things here.
Yeah, so it's the same low cost as your basic 10-point combi rifle across the board, but they've got different kind of secondary weapons that can add a bit to a team or a duo or whatever if
Hmm.
you take one. My eye is on the emitter,
Hmm.
personally. I think emitters are great. They are only BS11, so I wouldn't count on it, but it's just nice for 10 points.
Being able to just have, like, if you have to take an Alguacile and you're not running one as your lieutenant, for example, and in ground division at least, I can think of some other profiles I might use, but even in space division, our local Corregidor player who is very capable. We've got a couple of local Corregidor players. I mentioned Tony, but we also have Rob, not myself, a different Rob. He's won satellite events in the past. He's a Corregidor player primarily, and he tends toward trying to make he will usually run a Brigada lieutenant and
Right.
use that as the basis for a justification for a Brigada duo with a really good tacbot as a place to put Jazz. But even he will occasionally take the Alguacile LT. But if you don't have to take an Alguacile LT, but you do want something cheap, and Ground Division has, again, huge link flexibility, so hey, have a duo bonus or more, it's no problem. Being able to take a model that the emitter that can just potentially even just crossfire across your deployment zone and just be a little bit of insurance against something appearing where you didn't expect it, parachutist deployment zone, etc. People will already do things like if they suspect parachutists or drop troops, they'll do stuff like have picket flash pulse remotes with wide lines of sight across the back of the DZ, But a flash pulse is
Mhm.
very fallible. A +1 special die emitter is much more reliable at doing something
Yeah.
like stopping Van Zant from appearing, for example. So, hey, there's some usefulness there.
Yep, absolutely.
However, all right, that's, I think, all of the just stuff that kind of existed already. Now we get to our first new thing. And actually, probably not one of the things that I am most excited about, even though it's very cool. I like it a lot. It's just that I'm a bit more keen for a few other things. We have the Bearcat Airborne Heavy Regiment. Okay,
Yeah.
lot
So,
go.
well, I was just going to say, first of all, Rob, you're wrong, and I love saying that. I think it's a two wound parachutist
Oh
that
yeah, yeah,
forks
it's really good.
between like yeah, that forks between a boarding pistol +1 burst and a boarding shotgun +1 burst.
Yeah.
It's really
No,
solid.
it's
Uh,
fantastic. I am just there are let me put it this way. The reason why I say that is just to kind of punctuate the fact that there is stuff in Corregidor ground division that makes me salivate, right?
yeah.
There are things that I am sufficiently excited for, even just in terms of the fire team, that make me go, oh yes, this Bearcat KHD profile, that slaps. Moving on. We won't move on. We will
Yeah.
linger on this. It's a very cool profile, but it's just like it's interesting to me that I have things that I am more excited for than a effective 2 wound firewall killer hacker with a ballistic skill 13 burst 3 boarding shotgun and a
Yeah.
burst 2 boarding pistol. It takes a lot for me to not automatically love. I mean, actually, I do. I do
I
love the
know.
boarding shotgun profile, but like not lock it into lists immediately. It will be competing with things in this faction. Um,
Yeah.
Holy, that KHC profile is so good though. It's so good.
It's so good. It's so good with the firewall. I mean, every single profile is a specialist, right? All of them are specialists.
Hmm.
All of them, just because you have the sort of fork between the template and it has 2 wounds, so it can effectively use that fork. Like you can
Yep.
walk into something, and if they tell you don't care, you just template back. Yeah, it's a really solid kind of turn two parachutist play. And it's a veteran troop, it's heavy infantry, so it can do a bunch of classifieds.
There's a couple of other things just to note as well. So I am, and I'll just note your audio is just getting a little bit spotty there, but we'll push on through. The
Okay.
things that leap out to me that are particularly notable. I'm pretty much just there. The specialist Spitfire is interesting, but 90% of the time, 95% of the time, I would be leaning
Mm.
towards the KHD shotgun. And in addition to being
Yes.
a jet propulsion 6-2 move, Blizzard skill 13, burst 3 shotgun with a template, and a killer hacker with a firewall, the fact that it's Warhorse is a really big deal. Because Warhorse, like we know it's one of those little interactions, it just doesn't turn up, like doesn't people don't think about it terribly often. But being a hacker that is immune to isolation is very valuable in terms of going up against other enemy hackers because they can't respond with Oblivion. It's just a little bit more difficult for them to deal with you. It's one more thing. Jammers in the deployment zone, for example, you just casually ignore
Yeah.
those. And the damage output off of the shotgun, the hacker, etc. It's a very, very strong profile. Would you use any of the others particularly often?
Um, I'm not sure I would. I think it is the hacker that leaps out at me.
Yeah.
I would probably test the Spitfire, but I
Yep.
don't think I would take it anywhere near as.
I think I agree. I respect parachutist Spitfires, um, because they do have that with the with the 8 inches of movement on the jump and the ability to take those shots into the backs of things. They do have the ability to crack open a game, but so does a boarding shotgun. So I would definitely be leaning
Yeah.
toward the Zero SWC 30-point profile, but it's a very obvious kind of winner, but it's very, very, very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Mm.
Moving on next to the Coyotes Recon and Maneuver team. And we kind of have to assess all of the 3 profiles we're about to talk through kind of in one package because Coyotes aren't just Coyotes, they also unlock multiple other troops. And that's important. So when we look
Mm.
through these, we'll assess the Coyote on its merit, but remember that even if maybe we don't love these profiles, or we think they're okay, we'll often be taking them in any case to unlock other things. And the Coyote, actually, it's not bad. It's a medium infantry with many of the traits we would typically associate with medium infantry, some of which are negative. It is a little bit expensive, in some cases quite expensive. It is single wound, but it's got some skills that add some value. Ballistic Skill Attack plus 1 special die on Ballistic Skill 13 is always good. Warhorse is good. MSV1 is good. These things are kind of Wildcat equivalents almost. And then they've all got forward observers, which is really cool. Dodge armor plus 3 is a very weird rule that makes sense when you see the model, because the model has a combat shield. And I really like that that's a rule that basically is when they declare dodge, that's them using the shield. I think that's really awesome.
I adore that. I think messing around with dodge mods, because we've seen dodge plus 1 SD in Ariadne. Now we're seeing dodge arm plus 3. I think that's really potent. I mean, just to put that into perspective, it's starting at arm 2. So if you dodge and you're in cover, you go up to arm 8. That's kind of frustrating to try and shoot against.
Yeah. I mean, I like it just because it's like diegetic almost. It's evocative. I love it, no matter how good the mechanical strength is, and I think it's okay. It's a nice rule to have. I doubt it. I expect it costs almost nothing. I love the idea that you declare a skill, but it is really clearly evoking what the model is doing, which is slamming down that combat shield and hunkering behind it, and having a rule that uses the existing rules framework, the existing dodge framework, to effectively add an entirely new capability that makes sense. Like, I saw that, and it made no sense till I saw the model, and then it immediately made sense. That's sharp.
Yes.
That's just cool.
It's
Let's
good, yeah.
let's, however, talk about how we see these profiles being used, because there's a bunch of stuff here. And I note that your sound has evened out, so I'll hand to you.
Oh,
Talk
cool.
through use case on the Coyotes.
I love the Coyote. Specifically, I have played both with and against the hacker. So the killer hacker in the fire team with the carbonite upgrade. I've played against and with it a lot. That +1 SD emitter is a pain in the ass. It's a burst 4 MSV emitter in the active turn, and in the reactive turn, it's a burst 3 emitter that you can't smoke because it has MSV. You can't BS -3 because it has Warhorse. And if you ever do try and like -12 it or whatever with, let's say, with the Dasyu or something, which is hard because it has MSV, so it's difficult to mod down. If you ever do, it dodges. I think I mean, it suffers because it's a single wound troop, but that's 23 points. It's not that expensive. And what are you going to try and do? Well, if you try and burst you right back, the MSV1 emitter on probably 13s. So I think it's a really, really good utility sort of ARO defensive kind of profile. And it's with Carbonite for 0 SWC.
Yeah. Killer hackers with profiles that can then also be used as ARO pieces are already generally quite good. And we've already talked about Warhorse hackers. It's a Warhorse hacker and it's a BTS 6 hacker, which is solid as well. I am leaning. I think the FDOs, because of the fire team keywords, probably the most sensible way. But we're going to jump next to the Bambot. I am interested in trying out the Bambot profiles. I don't know if they're good, because how I see the Bambots being used and how I see the Coyotes being used are slightly at odds. But I love me some peripherals, and I love me some forward deployment with peripherals. I don't, even if the Coyote is hanging back, the fact that the peripheral can forward deploy. So I will be at least experimenting with those ones. I have some ideas about, and we'll talk about this in a moment. I have some ideas about what might constitute an interesting Group 2 combat group. That is very much a Rob-coded combat group, which we'll talk to once we've gotten through all three of the Bambot profiles. But I'm going to try at least some of those. Sorry, go.
Well, I was just going to say there are two things that I would also just like to bring up before we move on to Bambobots, which is, firstly, my conception of nomads is that they're quite scrappy and they play an asymmetric game. So I'm really happy to see emitters and things like that on these profiles. I think that kind of screams nomads to me, in terms of how I would think they function. And the second thing is Corregidor players for a while have had some SWIC problems because of the Alguacil Lieutenant SWIC tax.
Yep.
You do have a multi-marksman rifle fire teamable profile here, so you can get yourself a burst 4 multi-marksman for 0 SWIC and 26 points. Kind of expensive, but it's just worth noting for a faction that has had SWIC problems in the past.
Yep. The cheapest, look, 27 points for the boarding shotgun and the higher damage flash pulse with +1 special die. That doesn't look fantastic on a profile that's packing all of these things, but we're talking also about the ability to unlock the marksman profile. I think
Yeah.
you're probably correct in that it will often be worthwhile having at least like one, if you're running peripheral coyotes,
Yes.
running at least one of them as a multi-marksman for, like, it's 4 dice, MSV1, ballistic skill 13. That is by no means the worst gunfight that's ever taken place on a profile that is also doing peripheral things. But I think
Yes.
if we're taking the peripheral coyotes, let's talk about the peripherals. And so
Yeah.
let's jump through to the Bamba bot. Now, this is the first of 2 Bamba robot profiles. These ones are the synchronized peripherals attached to the coyotes. And one of them has an AP mine dispenser, and I saw that, and I almost didn't care about the rest of the profile, because
Yeah.
it's a peripheral with a mine dispenser.
Mhm.
That's the gist, basically. But
Yeah, that's what it does.
so it's a 6-point peripheral. It has 6/4 move. It forward deploys along with the coyote. It has mimetism -3, which is just kind of nice. It has no the profile that I think you will usually be taking. And actually, if we jump back and forth, I will note that I think you get to just choose at list construction, because all of
Yeah, I
those
think you
coyotes
do.
just say Bambabot, and so you
Yeah.
get to pick. I am by no means opposed to a deployable repeater peripheral. That's fine and interesting and useful, particularly given that that one also has a flash pulse, and both of them have higher damage chain rifles. But it is the AP mine dispenser that leaps out to me.
I
And
agree. I
it's a
agree.
peripheral. AP mines are a step just a little bit above shock mines because they threaten some damage to a much broader variety of profiles, and 6 points for a mine dispenser that can then also be a disposable chain rifle, a little bit of insulation.
Mhm.
It's just a nice profile. It's a profile that I like.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really nice profile. I would also note that the Bamba bot is a specialist. It's not a particularly good specialist at Whip 12, but it is a specialist, and that just gives you more scope to take the marksman rifle coyote if you want.
Okay, hang on a second. Sorry. So there are 2 things to note there. Firstly, I missed that on my first read through. But there are 2 things to call out. Forward Observer means it does have a ballistic skill attack that it can fork. Yes, I suspect that's what you were
Hmm.
alluding to. Where if
Hmm.
you have the multi-marksman and the Bamba bot, and both of them peak out at something within 24, and your opponent ignores the Bamba bot, it can Forward Observe. And
Yes.
2 dice unopposed Forward Observer has a good chance of landing, which has a whole variety of knock-on effects. Actually, I had missed that. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is why you're here, because I did not have a chance to get into this stuff as much.
That's
That's
okay.
that's really cool. But the other thing that's really significant, and this has been something that Panoceania have had for a while, we have Forward Observer on the Coyote, we have Forward Observer on the Bamba bot. Something that I have a friend over in Western Australia who dabbles a little bit in Infinity, and the challenge that he has had is that every time he's tried to get into a game, he's played a little bit, and then and he's a competitive lad, he's had a game where he budgets 2 orders to press a button, because
Mm.
statistically speaking, that's quite likely. But this is Infinity, and this is a game where you have to respond to catastrophes on the regular, and he just fails 3 willpower rolls
Yeah.
in a row to press a button, and he hates it. It just doesn't fit into
Mhm.
his head how things. He's very much like, this is how things should go, and he can respond,
Yeah.
but only to a point. It triggers him. And one of the things that you can do, like there's a new rule in ITS season 17, etc., that is very specifically to help with that exact thing. But if you have 2 models that can both move on to an objective, and we've seen this with the Forward Observer, what are they, drummers? Just
Drummers. Yeah.
having 2 dice, having 2 models that are both attempting to activate an objective, gives you a huge amount more likelihood. Even just a free willpower tool for the Bamba bot is a big deal in terms of activating buttons. Now, I wouldn't expect Corregidor to struggle for specialists. Masai Morans are right there, but sometimes that's the kind of thing that's quite useful. But I think the actual fact that
It
it's a
is.
forward observer, forward observing is a bigger deal there.
Yeah, so you get to do the sort of double shooting thing with the
Yeah,
forward observer and the
yeah,
marksman, which is nice.
yeah, that is really nice. I like that a lot. And in addition to the Coyotes being either very flexibly fireteam linkable or bringing a peripheral, they also unlock Bamba droids. And this is
Mhm.
another profile which, just going to point it out there, look at that, it's AP mine dispensers again.
Mhm.
More importantly, though, is that Bamba droids are linkable, and they are linkable quite flexibly. If I flick up in the
Yes.
slides, just to look at the fire team charts, Bamba droids can't form the basis of a Corregidor fire team. You do need something else, but you can pick almost anything else, including just a random Alguacil. But they do
Mhm.
contribute fire team bonuses. They are a Corregidor troop, which means that we have linkable benefits. You want to talk through a little bit how you found these things?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously a linkable mine dispenser is really good. It's quite frustrating to play against. Um, Worth noting that these are REMs, so if you want to buff them up, you can, and that gives you a nice BS14 or well, a marksmanship BS11 marksman rifle. So
Yep.
that's interesting. You've got a forward observer profile, which is just some nice utility with deployable repeaters. They're fast, and they have mimetism. So in some ways, they're kind of like Dakinis, sort of.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, just in Corregidor instead. But mine dispensers that you can link are terrible, terrible things.
It's they're just look they're very efficient profiles. Um, the the Thunderbolt, and if you can link these things, like you can link them to anything and then leave the other
Yes.
thing behind, and they'll carry the fire team by. It'll be a two-person Haris at that point. But if you want to move them forward, you can. Even if you don't want to move them forward, ECM, Mimetism, 6/4 move, and then
Mhm.
your selection of mind dispensers. The combination, like they're just single wound, armor 0, but they're 13 points for a Thunderbolt and a chain rifle. A Thunderbolt
Yeah.
with link bonuses is just good enough that you probably don't post it as a hard ARO, but in that kind of like crossfire, close approach watching, there are a bunch of cases where just having that gun is better than not having that gun. It's 0
Absolutely.
SWC. And it leads actually to one of the things that I'm kind of thinking about as a one of the things that leapt off the sheet at me as a combat group 2 that I think I am actually quite likely to run at some point is a very serviceable 5 trooper combat group, as long as you've got baggage literally anywhere else, is any troop to form the basis of a Bamba droid team, 2 Bamba droids and 2 synchronized coyotes. You
Mm.
have 5 troops with 5 orders and 4 mine dispensers. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
Now, is that a little bit extra? Yeah, probably. However, hear me out. What if we were to just put, what's that, 8 mines into the midfield every single time? It'll be less than 8 because you will miss some. But that seems fun. That seems, I mean, not for my opponent,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Not for your opponent, but it is for you. Um, and the thing is, it's not even really that expensive, right? That's
no.
the thing. You're paying either 13 or 16 points for the mine dispenser on the Bamba droid, and the Bambot is 6. This is not heavy tax.
And you've got the coyotes then actually to do some utility. There's a bunch of specialists in that combat group.
Mhm.
Practically speaking, what you probably actually will do in many lists is you will put some of these in. You will scatter them into lists just a little bit. You'll have a combat group that's
Yeah.
built to do, for example, you could do a fire team, a combat group that has like a group 2 combat group with that iguana and Stemplazond. Oh, look, it's another mine dispenser, but the iguana does a great many things with its orders
Mm.
potentially. And then if you've got a spare order or 2, you might throw out some mines from different pieces. You probably don't go all the way in on multiple peripherals, multiple Bamba droids, etc. But the option does exist, and the
Mm.
only issue with it is that much of the time you might be relying. We haven't seen something like the OSS defensive tools yet,
Yeah.
where OSS have got all of those, like they've had those layers of insulation. This is Corregidor. We've still got Masai Morans, which is really good. Masai Morans are outstanding. But I could see that kind of a group 2 often being relied on to just be like Bamba droids or Bambobots. Bambobots, I took you for your mine dispensers, but you're being called upon to use your chain rifle as a point-blank defense and die for the
Mhm.
cause. And look, it was 6 points. Something has to often die to blunt an offense. But yeah, I love these. I really love the whole
Yeah.
Coyote. Plus the fact that it's a rule. It's got to be a rule somewhere. Anytime someone puts a beret over a face combat mask, they're automatically a Command and Conquer character. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm extremely here for that. So very cool.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right. Our next profile, and we do have a few more new things to go through. And actually, just as a sort of a quick pause here, interesting for me is, and we might sort of circle back to this, but we actually have, I think, every single new Corregidor profile. Unlike OSS, where
Mm.
there's a bunch of stuff that is yet unknown, you could feasibly go out and play a game with Corregidor Ground Division tomorrow and have at least a pretty good idea that it would have some fidelity to the final version, um,
Hmm.
which is interesting. That's something. Like Corregidor is complete. Like I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but it's interesting that we are able to almost make a complete assessment, almost at this point. Anyway, moving on to Vigilantes, Tactical Support and Surveillance Special Group, a medium infantry camouflage infiltrator. What do you think of these?
Yeah. So these do a couple of really important things. Firstly, they bring counterintelligence,
Hmm.
so a sort of lieutenant-related ability into the mix, or I guess a command-related ability into the mix. And Nomads have previously lacked that, so this
Hmm.
is new ground straight off the bat. The other thing, as I've said for other profiles in Corregidor, is oh look, every single one of them is a specialist, which is
Yes.
quite important. And then, unlike most other forward deploying camouflage markers, this one's BS12 instead of BS11, so it's kind of closer to like a Fajan than like a Foxtrot, for
Yep.
example. Um, and then again, we've got some really interesting, really nice kind of mine layers with the AP mines. And oddly enough, I believe, is this the first profile that has an armed turret that isn't an engineer? I think it might be.
It's
Um,
certainly the
yeah.
first profile that has an armed turret that is under a camouflage marker.
Yes. And that's really important to me because you will have situations in games where someone rocks up and they will declare discover against you the first order, and you might think, oh, I'm absolutely going to die. I'm going to waste a bit of time. You just deploy the turret, and you've caused a massive headache because you've put like a total reaction thing in front of them for the next order. So I think that's quite significant.
There's these guys are interesting because there's they're not expensive, but they're not cheap. They
No.
they cross over that 20-point threshold, where this is kind of just bullshit. But in general terms, a model that is less than 20 points is 20 points being the average cost for a 15 trooper
Mm.
army, 300 points. So if your trooper is less than 20 points, it's saving some points for something else. If it's more, it's spending what you've saved.
Yeah.
None of these cross over 30 points, but they are all a little bit expensive, and that comes from being, I think, in particular, Armor 3 BTS 6.
Yes.
But all of these profiles have, and this is kind of unique because, like, if we look back at Bearcats, it was pretty easy for us to pick a winner. And you look at
Yeah.
some of the profiles, like we were going through the Nagas and the Dasyus, and they were like, oh yeah, there's 2 or 3 profiles there that are awesome. And
Mm.
usually in Corvus Belli design, that's kind of how it'll work. There'll be a couple of like edge case profiles that are interesting in very rare cases, and then there'll be a couple or one profile that's like, this is what you take that regiment for. But I could not, hand on heart, could not tell you which of these guys is the right profile because you've got a hacker, you've got like the hacker is a hacker with a sensor.
Yeah.
Okay,
Really good.
that's really
Yeah.
interesting. The killer hacker has armament. It's a multi-rifle light flamethrower BTS 6.
Yep.
The mine layer is still a specialist and has those weapons and is relatively cheaply costed and is a good infiltrating
Hmm.
midfield forward deployment specialist. The non-mine layer has an armed turret. I don't
Yeah.
know if I prefer mine layer AP mines or an armed turret. And that's like many models with armed turrets since the armed turret reload nerf, which again I'm not arguing with that at all. I think it was necessary. Those things were they could be degenerate. Um, but what that meant was that you had all of these models with armed turrets that were kind of balanced or were made very appealing by the ability to reload. I remember saying that like the Monstrucker for 12 points with a rifle turret was one of my favorite pieces because you could throw one out every turn, and that's not the case anymore. And every model, what I have found since is that every model that has a turret with rifle range bands is now like, all right, well, they all start in the deployment zone, and so the best you can do is throw the turret forward 8 inches, but to find a really good location, maybe you won't. And so combi rifle armed turrets, because they genuinely cost points, they cost points and an order now, they're very
Yeah.
much not cheap, they've fallen off. But the specialist operative is 8 inches up the field and under camouflage, so it should almost always survive, or worst case can place it as an ARO. So it's
Mm.
really interesting. And then the forward observer has an emitter and a boarding shotgun +1 burst,
It does.
which is
Yeah.
really good. And they're all so closely costed that I genuinely could not tell you which of these is like the best vigilante. They're all
No.
very interesting.
And you're going to want to take at least one, I think, because counterintelligence
Mhm.
is, a fantastic skill to have, and it's a BS-12 skirmisher, which is great.
That probably the biggest thing about them, and what will like have me cycling through lists, is I think usually I will just want to take one. I think the
Mm.
first vigilante is really appealing. It gets you that counterintelligence, which is useful in about half of games, but it is very useful in those
Yeah.
games, and it gets me one of these cool profiles. But I think the second, like as soon as if you commit to a second vigilante, no, they're 25 points at cheapest, 29 points at most expensive. That's a lot for a single wound trooper. The
Yeah, I
second the
agree.
second vigilante is like, look, that's displacing something significant. And so that means I have to play 5 games with vigilantes just to have tried
Mm.
all of the profiles that are interesting, which is that's really like really solid. It's very very nomad in that sense of like
Yeah.
eclectic and varied, and it suits it. Yeah, they're one. I think one is the correct number, but I think one is often going to be. You'll cut them sometimes because 28 points is a lot, but often one is going to be very appealing.
I think they're just very well designed. Like it's one of those troops where every profile offers you something,
Yeah.
something interesting, and you're going to want to mess around with them, and that's great.
What a world we live in. We're finally in
Mm.
N5, where I'm sitting here looking at a medium infantry skirmisher that costs well north of 20 points and saying, that's really cool and interesting. I
Yeah.
remember like there are days when this would not have gotten not the faintest look in. But these are really sharply designed. I like these profiles a lot.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
Cool.
Next, and
Um,
speaking of, so you were saying something, but I'm about to jump into a rant. Carry on.
go on, go on.
So, speaking of what a world we live in where I can speak effusively about medium infantry troopers, because it has taken us like I started playing in early to mid N3, and for 2.5 entire editions, medium infantry have been the thing that just does not quite work with how the game is played, and we slowly over time you're like, oh, that medium infantry is pretty okay. Oh, bolts are pretty good. Um, and now to be added to the illustrious roster of medium infantry troops that are actually pretty solid. Territorial domination, Um,
Yeah,
I
we've
have
we've
some
cracked it.
significant thoughts, but yeah, what do you think of these guys?
I love territorials. Again, another profile I've played with and against many times now. They're really, really, really good. First of all, they've got the incredible fire team flexibility. They're a
Hmm.
Corregidor keywords troop. That means that you can fire team them with a Dactari.
Yep.
Oh look, they're one wound infantry with immunity to shock and immunity to critical hit. So they're far more robust than they initially appear because they are just one wound. Um, the big selling point of these troops, BS13 with marksmanship, right? So your pseudo BS16 in a lot of cases. Um, the lists that are struggling with SWIC, you've got an AP marksman rifle with tactical awareness for 29 points. It's expensive, but it's not going to go down on the first hit because of immunity shock.
Hmm.
Well, I guess unless you're very unlucky with double action. Um, and then if you aren't limited by SWIC and you want a very solid gunfighter, you've got a specialist operative and tactical awareness AP Red Fury, which is a terrifying weapon with burst 5 if you're fire team to go up against. They are deceptively quick. they're only 4/4, sure, but many of the profiles attack aware,
Hmm.
and they're also specialists on quite a few of them as well. I really like territorials. I think they are going to be maybe a bit of a glue troop for Corregidor in the case that you're going to put them in lists and they're going to work for you because they do a lot.
That fire team that you mentioned of a territorial plus a Daktari is
Yeah,
exactly the one that I was thinking of as well.
yeah,
And the really interesting from a design perspective is you have a model that is one wound, but it's a very rare case of a model that is one wound with no dogged, no wounding cap that you can still kind of rely upon to be able to take a gunfight a second time if it fails. Because of the shock
yes.
immunity and because of the critical hit, unless you're fighting into like powerful ammunition, and you've got to pick your fights in
Mm.
that case. But if you're fighting against a combi rifle or a HMG or any gun that fires single action ammunition, the worst that can happen is that you are knocked unconscious because shock
Mhm.
immunity won't kill you. Shock immunity means shock won't kill you, and immunity to critical means you only ever take the one save from a critical hit. So even if
Right.
your opponent crits you, worst case you take a wound and the Daktari is right behind you. And the Daktari is giving fire team bonuses, which means you have that 30-point tactical awareness AP Red Fury or 20-point tactical
Yeah.
awareness, 29-point tactical awareness AP Marksman Rifle, and she picks it back up again. And maybe you don't reform the fire team because maybe you've had to re-roll the Daktari to get maybe your command tokens are stressed, but the model is still present and can take the fight a second time. And it's a medium infantry gunfighter. It's the second medium infantry gunfighter in the game. Probably not. I'm exaggerating. There will have been others, but single wound medium infantry are a category of trooper that historically just hasn't worked quite well, and territorials do, which is really cool.
Yeah, these work really, really well. I mean, if you're a Corregidor player and you're kind of on the fence about this box and you're not sure, honestly, get it for the territorials. Think about these and think about, linking them with Dactari. They do work. They're really quite strong, actually.
One of the things that also I'm considering, I'm not sure about yet, I will have to test, is that AP Red Fury profile is also available as a lieutenant. And I like reading down through these, I read this and I went, is there a chain of command anywhere in Nomads? Historically, not very much. But that possibly serves as a segue to our next troop to look at.
Yeah.
Just
To our
before
last one. Yeah.
just before we do that, obviously it's the gunfighting ones that kind of leap out. Do you find yourself ever looking at like I don't know how I feel about the boarding shotgun Panzerfaust because marksmanship on a shotgun
Yeah.
is a bit wasted because it often catches the enemy out of cover at close range fights anyway. What about the emitter?
Um, I don't know how I feel about that with the Coyote in the faction.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather have +1 SD than marksmanship on an emitter, personally.
Yep.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. It 28 points. It's another tactical awareness trooper, and tactical awareness is good. But I think I like there's a theme. I am pretty sure I'd have to go back and check. Like I'd have to pull it together. But I reckon you can come pretty close to a 25 order Corregidor list ground division if you
Hmm.
really want to. But I think once you start doing that, you begin to fray some of the other like what constitutes actually like a good list and good list building. I
Yeah.
I think for me, if I was looking to be like, I'm gonna just spam the shit out of I'm gonna get my lieutenant order, that's gonna be one, I'm gonna get these multiple tactical awareness, that's where the engineer with tac aware starts to come in. But I think that's probably a bridge too far. It's another 28-point troop. I think that list, once you put it together, would be very thin on the ground in terms of one chain rifle gets into you and you start, like a dog warrior hits you, for example, and you're really beginning to regret life. So,
Yeah, I agree. You could do, I don't know, I'm not sure if you would. You could do Territorial and Vostok with the engineer, maybe.
I was actually
I don't
thinking,
don't know.
as we were talking, a safe lieutenant choice if you're not running chain of command is you could potentially run a list with a bunch of remotes. And because
Mhm.
we've seen bomber bots and bomber droids, but you can also just take like total reaction bots. A
Yeah.
tactical awareness lieutenant engineer with a couple of peripherals is a it's a niche pick, but that's 2 orders every round for free to engineer things back up. That could be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that could work in some lists.
And once a game, you're going to be like, all right, roll up your sleeves. It's active turn emitter time. Oh shit, I missed.
Yeah.
But there,
Yeah.
the option exists, but it's mostly 2 orders of two. Admittedly, willpower 13, 2 orders of willpower 13 engineering. Um,
Mm.
but speaking of the lieutenant profiles, and hey, does chain of command exist in this faction? Scrolling down now to our final profile for ground division, Black Panther, the shifter insertion group, and what a weird, what a weird profile.
It's a very odd profile, isn't it?
I looked at this, and so my chain of thought looking at this was I looked at it and I went, that seems kind of bad. Let me just check the fire teams. And I scrolled back up, and it's a wild card that counts as it's a wild card. It just joins every single fire team.
Mhm.
It might even. I don't think it has any keywords. I'm going to treat the audience
Yeah.
now to a rapid scroll as I move back up through.
No, I don't think it
It
does.
has no keywords, but technically you can add 2 of them to any fire team. The important thing is you can add 1 shifter to any fire team,
Mhm.
and that makes a lot more sense of this slightly cheap, slightly interesting specialist operative strategic deployment with a bunch of other stuff.
I
Yeah.
think they do a couple of interesting things. So I agree with you. When I first looked at this profile, Rob, I thought, I don't know what this is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, I think actually they're quite compelling. Um, First of all, they've got the really interesting thing of triangulated fire with dodging on 13s because they dodge +3,
Mm-hmm.
which can, I don't know, that could be quite interesting. They're all specialists, and they all have stealth. You've got a chain of command profile that's cool because it brings an Emarat, which is nasty, and Disco Ball.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really, really helpful for some vision control. And again, because it's a wild card, it goes with anything. You've got a really nice defensive profile with Mine Layer EM mines, which are great. You've got another one that's kind of gunfightery, which has the EM mines again, but with a Thunderbolt +1 burst.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite nice fire team fuel. And then finally, you've got a paramedic. Um, I think the chain of command is groundbreaking for nomads in general because, as far as I'm aware, they just have not had chain of command up till
I
now.
believe that's the case. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and I think being able to put disco balls in any fire team you want is really quite special, actually.
I agree. I don't know. This is another profile where I don't know which of them I like the most, but
Hmm.
I do think it's probably down to the cheaper EM mine layer and the chain of command. And
Yes.
in both cases, like the paramedic is I can put a paramedic in any fire team. Yes, you can. You can technically do that. The Daktari exists and is 14 or 15
Yeah.
points, and has keywords. But the wild card 21 point strategic deployment. Strategic deployment is a skill that is it's okay. I find this is more of just an idiosyncrasy of tables. When people are setting up tables, and this includes me, they tend to think in stages where they think about what the midfield looks like and what the deployment zones look like. And that tends to sort of awkwardly leave, not always, but just I see it enough that I notice it. And I notice it in my own tables as well, where you build the good midfield to make sure that there's deployment zone line of sight blocking, you build the good deployment zones. It leaves the 4-inch space outside of your DZ, generally the place of the board that is most likely to be slightly bereft of
Yes.
meaningful positioning, um, just as a sort of table idiosyncrasy. And so I have always found strategic deployment to be at best an okay ability, but consider the shifter is a wild card. You don't need to you can just take a combat group like this is Corregidor. They've got pure duos with huge flexibility. You can just take 2 or 3 fire teams in your primary combat group and take a shifter with no plan at list construction for who it will join, and then decide when you're deploying who would benefit from strategic deployment.
Yeah.
And if
I
you're
think
take
that's really powerful.
if you're,
Yeah.
and that's because like one of the big things where we see strategic deployment elsewhere is that it tends to be on expensive troops. It tends to be on expensive troops that want to do something, and then sometimes just the best place for the fire team is not a position that benefits from strategic deployment, and it's often not a particularly cheap skill. But being able to
Mm.
just say any one of these 2 or 3 teams or 4 teams, you could theoretically have 4 fire teams in a group with a shifter ready to join them. You probably wouldn't, but you could. That's the I am paying once for strategic deployment for whoever will use it. And then the model doesn't have to do anything else. It's chain of command and it sits in the back of the table 8 inches behind where the team deployed and it's chill. And unless it needs
Yeah.
to fire off a disco ball, that's all it needs to do. Or it's a mine layer and it does its job at deployment placing an EM mine. So not like it's not cheap. 17 and 21 is right on that. You have to find the points, particularly for the the 21 point profile. You're like, yeah, okay, I'm taking
Yeah.
up a chain of command and this stuff. But that's an interesting package of utility.
Yeah. It's a very interesting package of utility, and I think you're absolutely right that in a world where you're taking multiple fire teams and one shifter, you get to just be really flexible in picking the one fire team you want every game, potentially to just have a bit of forward deployment.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like so many profiles, oops, it's a specialist.
Yep.
So it's just quite handy to have in a list, I think. There's maybe some interesting stuff you can do with a triangulated fire thunderbolt. I don't know, I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
potentially it's there.
I'm not going to hold. I there's one profile in the game that I have seen make consistent use of triangulated fire, that being the Hassassin IR, and even
Yeah,
that can be a little bit of a reach sometimes. I don't.
yeah, edgy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think every now and again, like you will have the game where you're like, aha, this is the game. Like one game in 5, one game in 10. Like, oh shit, triangulated fire. I had a game just recently where I had two models in close combat on a button. Now triangulated fire doesn't do what it used to do, where you could completely safely avoid hitting the friendly, but it is still much easier. Like you get to avoid all of those penalties. And
yes.
I was like, oh shit, do I have anything in my list with regulated fire? And I did not. And I had to just let that situation resolve naturally with Miyamoto Musashi doing what Miyamoto Musashi does. But the uh, the fact that like you have it's one more like the shifter. You said it best, I think, where you said this is a useful profile. Triangulated fire is one more thing that is useful, and it's useful
Mm,
once in every 10 games. But it's useful once in every 10 games, um,
yes.
and all of the other things, whether it's disco and chain of command or mine layer or an EM mine, just having chain of command in Nomads now on a profile that can do its work at deployment or from the deployment zone is, I mean, even just being like chain of command is triggered, I will be using Lieutenant Order to throw out a disco ball to make a run on an objective. That's
Mhm.
useful. Uh, the model looks like it's the only thing I would kind of think. The only criticism I will make is that the visual design of these guys does not scream useful. It does not scream like
Yeah,
the Black Panther mask and the knife is like this is not that's a like wannabe action hero, not like the most useful man in the space station.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I have to assume that
Um,
when he's not wearing that mask and doing combat stuff, he's the guy that happens to know how to like rewire a car and tune a piano and like if he's always good for a loan if need be, and he'll shout you a beer at the pub, and then just incidentally he has this thing for the Panther mask in combat.
yeah, why? Because why not? It's also just worth noting it's another source of sensor in Corregidor. The second, well, third if you count the FO bots that everyone gets. So
Yeah,
we've got the shifter with sensor and we've got the vigilante with sensor. Corregidor hates camouflage markers. You've got so much MSV. You've got a lot of sensor. Enjoy playing against TAC, I guess, because that's you're gonna have a good time.
absolutely. That's probably a good note, and we're closing in on. I know you've only got a couple of hours, and we have consumed basically all of
Mm.
that. Thank you very much. Probably a good point just to circle back to the fire team chart, and I think we sort of called this actually when we were going through this before we looked at any profiles. What does the identity of Corregidor look like? Really, really flexible fire teams, with perhaps more of an emphasis than we might have expected on versatile and valuable single wound profiles,
Yeah.
which is pretty neat.
Mm. You've got, you've got marksmanship, you've got MSV, you've got sensor, you've got tactical awareness, you've got specialists on most profiles. You can, well, in some ways, I would say, from looking at this, Corregidor lists almost build themselves because every troop can slot into a different role in terms of gunfighter or specialist or utility.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I would say they build themselves because I would, and this is just me splitting hairs over terminology. I I would use that to describe a list where I would say something builds itself if there's a very obvious path from A to B to
Mm,
C, your gunfighter into your specialist into your etc. I would
right.
say Corregidor is almost the opposite in the sense that there's an archetype, there's a Magic the Gathering deck archetype called a pile of cards, which is to say
Yeah.
it isn't a deck archetype, it's just all of the things you thought were cool. And
Yes.
Corregidor look like one of the. There are only a very small number of factions in Infinity that work if the first time where you're just like, I don't know what's good, I'm going to build a pile of cards.
Yeah.
Corregidor look like they work from the starting point as a pile of cards before you refine them
Yes.
because of that layer
Yeah, they're a good
flexibility.
stuff pile.
Yep.
Like, yeah,
And that's
yeah,
neat. That's
I
pretty
agree with
cool.
that.
The what does otherwise leap out to me is the quantity, if you want it, the quantity of tactical awareness that you can put in a surface division team is very, very high. With AVA2 Stemplazons and multiple tags, including cheap tags and the territorials.
Mhm.
I think that the exaggerated 25 order list is probably a little bit beyond reach, realistically, but you can get a very, very healthy order count with Corregidor if you want to.
Yes.
And there are some people, I'm some people, there are some people that appeals to. So I think if I'm looking at these guys, what will probably happen is that I will build a list and I will realize that its defense is egregiously thin and then I will rewrite it. But the first
Mm.
version will be tactical awareness and mind dispensers and gunfighters and everything is instantly a specialist and it's a pile fueled by a huge order count. I do love that kind of list. I'll just need to solve the defense because that's where I think it'll be riskiest.
Yeah, but for that, I think, you look back to the Jaguars, which now have the correctional keyword,
Yep,
and that's giving you easy access to plus SD Panzerfaust, and the Coyote is giving you good access to plus SD emitters.
yep,
So it can be done. It can definitely be done.
absolutely. All right. That crosses us exactly over into the 2 hour threshold. And it's probably time for me to clock off as well. It's getting just a
Mm.
little bit on the later side where I am. Ollie, look, once again, thank you enormously for joining me this evening. It's early where you are. Thank you a huge amount for donating both your time and your expertise. Are there any just sort of last shout outs or notes or things you'd like to link or direct people to?
Um, no, not really. I think, preview week will be upon us when this is released, and look forward to exploring the new profiles. Everyone have a think, and yeah, look forward to the new box because I think it's looking really good.
I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with. All right,
Yeah.
that will wrap us up. Just to do the usual intro spiel. Thank you everyone who's watched this video all the way through. 2 hours, about 2 hours or thereabouts of content. As a quick reminder, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. Click like, click subscribe, all of those usual call to action things. We put out Infinity videos about once a week. This video will be coming out on the 12th of May Australian time, just in time for the embargo. And so I hope very much you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week for more Infinity content.